Hello everybody and welcome back. This is Petra Lohmeyer again, and I hope you've gotten quite a lot out of this course already. But because the last bit was a little bit heavy, let's get to the fun part again. So let's remember how it works when it really works, and that was the Gurkha strategy for me. So just as a recap, that is to reverse your energy and go out to people first and be nice to them and make sure that they are comfortable, give them value, and then they will be looking at your animals in a whole different way. So what did this give me? It gave me a whole new confidence, because on the travel back, I had to then travel back where I am now and where I'm in a nice apartment again, and there were no conflicts, although I was at, I think, 3 campgrounds in between. It was over several months. I was in a different apartment in between as well, which was absolutely beautiful. I had beautiful neighbors who all loved the animals as well, and they also had animals themselves. It seemed almost as if I found help everywhere, and people wanted to help everywhere, including some people who wanted to adopt one of my cats in one of these campgrounds, because I was going to work and they didn't really know if I was okay with them. And that was a really lovely thing. It wasn't something threatening. It was just something where people offered help. So that was a completely different experience than I'd had before. But then, of course, I was almost here and there was a setback. I had a relapse because I thought, okay, this has gone so well for this entire time now. It can't go wrong now. So I'm going to hide again, which I did, unfortunately. Instead of staying on the campground or choosing another campground that was less busy than the one that I was at, I went to an old friend, or who I thought was an old friend, and he did not tell me everything that was going on there. And unfortunately, that had a very bad consequence. It would not have happened probably if I had just kept the confidence. For some reason, it was the biggest mistake ever, and for some reason there's this theory that the universe will give you the same obstacle over and over and over again until you actually get over it, until you learn to handle it, and then it will go away. Well, I had gone back and the obstacle came again. So at that point, I decided, okay, I'll go forward again, and then that actually worked even there until I moved in here. But one of the things that I thought would be helpful to include here is a second inner strategy that I found incredibly helpful, especially to deal with, to make sure that relapses can always happen in everything, I suppose, but to make sure that they happen as little as possible, and also to deal with it when the relapse has happened. And one of those inner strategies I found, funny enough, through a previous job of mine. I used to make quite a bit of money in the city of London, and unfortunately then it got really stressed, and that's how I found out through the Gurkha strategy, because they were obviously stressed as well. It got really, really stressful, to the point that in our team quite a few people got signed off for stress, and I was one of them. And they forced me more or less to go to the doctor, which I'm very grateful for, because that may have saved my life. And one of the doctors then prescribed meditation in order to deal with that. Not medication, but meditation, right? And I thought it was a lot of foo-foo stuff. I had heard of meditation before, but I didn't really know what it was. I thought it was some crazy schöne Sachen. But I thought, oh, well, I do a lot of crazy stuff, right? I used to do skydiving, so let's try that too. So the first thing that I tried was mindfulness. And mindfulness, they gave me this standard book that they recommend, especially for people who are in jobs that have absolutely nothing to do with nature. I was in a big corporate job. And it basically recommended, it was a very long book, I think it was 400 or 500 pages, and it basically recommended that you breathe in, you breathe out, and you watch yourself doing it. And I breathed in and I breathed out and I breathed in and I breathed out, and I watched myself doing it, and it bored me to death. It did bring me down in a way, but just with this technique and nothing around it, there's actually a way to make this work very, very well in all kinds of contexts. But you have to do a few more things than just to watch yourself breathe in and breathe out, and you have to basically not watch. One of the strategies is not to watch the breath, but the pause in between the breaths. Because if you watch the breath, then you watch movement, and that is something that I have for Master Co, for example. If you watch the pause in between the breaths, that's where stillness comes. And that's a whole different story. But I didn't know that at the time. I was just watching the breath going in, going out, and it was just boring. It didn't work for me. I would never have stuck with it. There was, however, something else that I was doing already, which I wasn't aware of, and that was sometimes, just sitting in the garden and just watching nature. That is a form of meditation. And also during the breaks, I was negotiating contracts at the time. I had a very long day. I had 4 hours of commute both ways, so 2 hour a leg basically. And I was just really tired during lunch break. So sometimes I would just lie somewhere and have a quick nap, a quick power nap. Sometimes I would go to the Thames and I would just watch the ducks, and see the ducks just float around, float around. And what that did is that it got me out of my mind, out of the thinking mode of my mind, into the creativity mode of my mind. And not only did I really like the ducks and they kind of broke my pattern a little bit, but also I suddenly, because I wasn't focusing all the time, suddenly ideas came into my head from other areas, and I realized a couple of times that actually saved my job because I had forgotten to ask for an approval or do this or that, the other, and I would have just moved on had I stayed in the job or gone to lunch with some colleagues. Instead, I remembered it, and then I could actually incorporate that. So meditation is something that I actually did during that time, and that's actually not something that is very uncommon in that world. I found out later that some of the biggest hedge fund managers, for example, Ray Dalio, for example, swears by meditation for 30 years already. I just had never heard of it before because I always associated it with something, kind of new agey, basically. Well, anyway, so this is what I did, and that kind of worked, but it wasn't enough for me. So I thought, okay, let's try the Druids. I was in England, I wasn't English. I had a bit of a problem with the culture, so I thought, okay, let's find out what these English are about. So I went to a Druid camp and did even a couple of the courses that they did. And that was a really interesting experience, especially when I found out that they are nudist as well. They didn't advertise that. So I was sitting at the campfire at some point and I don't know what we were doing. I think we were singing or something. And then this nude guy just sits down next to me, as if. Now I'm German and we are used to mixed saunas, so I don't really have a problem with nudity, but it was still a weird thing. We were all sitting there close and there's this nude guy sitting down. So that is how I found out that they're also doing nudist things. But that was that. They still had some really interesting meditations in their first course, where you become a bard, because the head of the order is a psychologist. So I'm guessing that he just put a few of his own things into that, into the tradition. I found out later, I'm not entirely sure that he even believed in the whole thing, but psychologists, you have to be a little bit careful, especially us, if we are a little bit different than society. Because I realize psychologists want to help you, and they're good people, but they are also hired to make you fit. And so was he. So he gathered all these people who like nature in this Druid order. And at the time, England was still very much a hunting culture. So at some point there came the point where you had to make, you had to just go on trust, and you were told that if you go on from here and stay with all your friends and all your mates and this wonderful community, then you would have to take some things on trust and they would not be comfortable. Well, I went to one of these camps that were kind of in the transition period. Turns out he's a hunter. And he wanted to tell us how great that is and how very natural that is. Of course, it wasn't just me in the audience. There was another diehard animal lover in the audience. It didn't go over well. But that is what you have to be aware of, because a lot of times it isn't the first time that people who are a little bit feel more or have more development in some areas are seen as being crazy. Right, you see it, for example, at Copernicus, for example, he was stoned, right, just for saying that the Earth goes around the sun instead of the other way around. And the psychologists at that time would have also tried to convince you of that. It has nothing to do with reality. It has to do with what the main people in the culture see as reality at the time. So you have to be a little bit careful with these things, that they don't try to build rapport with you to just lead you in a completely different direction that you don't want to go into. Because if you really are one of our people, if you really are somebody who feels the connection to nature, there's nothing wrong with that. It is a further development, as we said before in Claire Graves' theory, that first you just care about yourself, then you care about the family, then you care about the nation, then you care about maybe a bit more of the nation, then you care about all humanity, and then you care about all life. Right? That is not something that is a bad thing. That is actually the furthest of development. That is something that is taught in many spiritual traditions, including Hinduism and Buddhism. But it is not taught necessarily in the West here. So they will see that as not right, or will try to find holes in it, like that you only love animals and not people, and that's why you're wrong. And a lot of animal activists and a lot of people who love animals have been hurt so much by people that they will go in that direction, but that doesn't mean that they're naturally that way. It just means that they have been hurt by one part of the whole part of what they love. So be a little bit careful with that. So I found that out. So the druids weren't for me. But I hadn't given up yet. Some of these meditations had been quite helpful, and I found them really good. And in the end, I did find the right meditation teacher. For me, that is Master Ko. It depends on you what you like. He may not be for everyone, but what I did find is that I like spiritual meditations more than just meditations without any kind of background. And spiritual meditations, they are usually attached to some sort of religion, but they aren't religious. Meaning religions usually divide and have things that they do different, while the spirituality of all religions is amazingly similar, if you take a look at that. And Master Ko and his teacher, Master Chok Sui, I hope I pronounced that right, he did a really good job in identifying all these things that we have, all these outer rituals in different religions, but in the inner world, a lot of the things seem to be the same teachings in a way. And that comes through to meditation. That's why I like his meditations, but I don't get any money from him. I don't have an affiliate commission or anything. That's just what works for me. And that's why I'm telling you. But just do some research what will work for you, because one of the I am not going to teach you meditation at this point because I am not qualified to do that yet. I may be at some point. But I did find a whole lot of things that are very, very useful in meditation, that are not just watching your breath go in and out and boring yourself to death. What I found watching the breath in stillness is can work if you look at it in a bit of a different way. I love guided meditations. In this Druid order, it was a lot that there was a story that they were using, and then you were going into different states, basically different animals, and becoming different animals, and then becoming a fish and stuff. And some of these were also things that I've found later in personal development courses in a little bit of a different way. So I'm assuming that they are known in psychology, and they help you to deal with certain things and make certain things aware that are in your subconscious. There's one meditation is prayer. If you don't believe in all this foo-foo stuff, prayer is a way to meditate. There are active nature meditations like wood bathing, for example. That's a Japanese thing, which is very helpful for people. I find going jogging can be, once I awaken that sense in me, and there's a whole other things that happen if you meditate on a regular basis. This feeling of oneness, or feeling of being connected to everything. And I found that basically going on a jog, for example, turns that on for me. If I go to a jog into the woods, or if I go to a jog into the fields, for example, I suddenly have these oneness experiences also that I usually have in guided meditations. So you got to try a few things, probably, what works for you. The way to see if it's something good for you is if it's healing and it doesn't scare you. If it constricts you, there's probably a problem somewhere. If you're scared by it, there's probably a problem somewhere. There may be times at which point, apparently in the inner world, there are. I'm not quite there yet, but there are some scary things to see. I haven't seen them yet. But in the beginning, you will find a whole lot of healing. If there's healing, then you're probably on the right path. So I just wanted to put this out there for you, because I found it very, very, very helpful. So again, the outcome for me is mental health. Obviously, if you are afraid all the time, if you have a problem with this reversing energy thing, it is also something that will help you directing energy, because that is part of the whole meditation, at least spiritual meditation thing. Effective execution of outer strategies. All the outer strategies that we talked about will depend on your inner world being in place and being intact, and you having the confidence to execute them, because otherwise it will not come over properly and then it will not work, right? And you don't have to be a massively spiritual person to do that. I'm not sure the Gurkhas were massively spiritual people, but it worked for them very, very well. Also, it works for lots of performers that you've seen before. You know, if you see performers and they have this charisma, that is a part of, they usually do some sort of meditation or some sort of spiritual practice in order to get that to a level that you can actually feel it in the last row. Right. So benefits of I experienced are peace and relaxation. It allowed omissions to come to the surface, as I said, when I watched the ducks on the Thames. I could make a space between me and a stressful situation, even in that stressful situation itself. Especially, I never really had a big problem dealing with external events that had nothing to do with humans. Like if I was doing sports or something came up and I had to react really quickly, then I'm quite good at that because I'm very trained with that. I used to do gymnastics. I used to do all kinds of very dangerous sports. So that is an area where I'm very confident. Where I wasn't confident was dealing with human aggression, because honesty, where I grew up, we didn't have that much aggression. We didn't have these witch hunts that are so prevalent nowadays. But also, I was hiding, right? So a lot of times I avoided any kind of confrontation that could have come up by betraying those that I really love the most, which is also something that will not sit well with you in the long term. There's another benefit is a oneness feeling, a support, joy when needed, that is accessible to you at all times, even if nobody's around, which is really amazing. That is something amazing that I found. You learn how to reverse the flow of energy once you can feel energy. If that is only in your mind, I don't care. You know, you may think, okay, maybe she's just imagining it. Maybe I am. I don't care. It works. And it also works on people outside of me. They've actually found, I don't know if I said this in one of the other talks before, apparently there is research that people, when they radiate love and radiate like a golden light to people and radiate love to people, it actually affects the electrical field of the people standing close to them. Apparently that is what has, I don't know the experiment myself. I wasn't told by the person, you know, who did it and, you know, in which journal it was, but that's, I do trust that person, and I found that very interesting. And I can see it myself, you know, and even if it is just my body language that changes, right? It is a way, there are ways to protect yourself emotionally, and there are all kinds of things like shields and stuff that you can do, and whether that only works in your own head or it actually has an energetic effect, it doesn't matter as long as it works, right? A lot of these things I came up with when I was bullied at work and then by the neighbor, I automatically came up with them. I didn't even know that they existed. And then suddenly I heard about these spiritual practices, which I'm pretty sure I'd never heard before. But anyway, so there are interesting things that you can do. It's a way to direct energy and influence situations before they materialize. We'll get to that a little later. You keep the connection with those you love, even after they're passed. That is something that a lot of people talk about, that if their husband or their wife died or one of their pets died, they suddenly feel that it comes back. And that is the feeling that I had with Carter. It was the first time that I understood the lesson of Easter. Because I was totally in distress when, you know, my first cat died. Because he was more to me than just a pet and then just an animal. There was a real connection there. And after 3 days, I had the feeling that I could feel him again. And I always had that feeling too when I was at his grave. So, and that was very helpful for me in many ways. I also found it is very helpful with my pets when I go on holiday. Funny enough, they actually react to that. If I imagine that I'm petting them in the morning or at night, when I'm away. When I come back again, they're much more relaxed than if I don't do that, because before they would be totally distraught, and that's why I couldn't go away more than a few days, which is really, how you can explain that without spirituality, I don't know. Maybe there is a way. But then even scientists say nowadays that we are connected everywhere. That is actually a scientific principle. And there are interesting things like quantum entanglement, where a little bit over here can influence a little bit over here faster than the speed of light, which shouldn't be possible. In fact, there are interesting things that you get into, but you don't have to get into the foo-foo stuff. Even if you just do the breathing in, breathing out, that's what the SEALs do. The Navy SEALs, for example, there's a guy who's teaching it. There's a certain breathing pattern they do in order to deal with stressful situations. Even that just helps you. Right? Just find some sort of meditation that you can come back to yourself when you have a stressful situation, because sometimes that will happen. Sometimes bullies, they will be there. Sometimes you will have to do something with the animals like travel or move, which stress you out. And that can help you to stay centered so that you are actually there for your animals and you're there for maybe wildlife. If there is a dangerous situation, that you can get it under control and it doesn't go out of control. There's a lot more, but it needs to be experienced. So if you haven't done it before, just find the right teacher for you, and just look around a little bit. Be very careful. There is a lot of interesting people out there who maybe just want to make money. I found that those who are really genuine in the space of spirituality and meditation, not necessarily in personal development, they usually charge, but if it's meditation, you will find a lot of stuff online on YouTube, which is free. There's quite a lot of people out there. There's Sadhguru, there's Master Ko, there's some spiritual teachers that you wouldn't think of as spiritual teachers, so I won't out them. So there are different people out there. Deepak Chopra, for example, also does a few things. He's a medical doctor. Now that's the action. Do some research. As I said, spirituality connects, and meditation is oftentimes connected to a spirituality, but it doesn't have to be. In the same spirit, we are looking for something that includes all. So find something that may specialize in a certain way. You usually have to specialize in a certain way. You can't use all ways at once, but it doesn't exclude everybody else. So if you find a way that is kind of works for you but excludes everybody else as evil, I stay away from that, right? So find something that works for you. It may be through practical work like yoga. Yoga is one way of finding that connection. It can be learning through theory. That's more Buddhism, which is very cerebral. And it's the Eightfold Path, right? And it doesn't say that everything's evil or there's only unhappiness in the world. That's a mistranslation, apparently. It just says, there's suffering in the world and then how you get out of it. So that's a more cerebral way. It's mysticism, Hinduism, Christianity, for example, or connecting to nature are ways of mysticism of getting there. Find something that works for you. It doesn't have to be foo-foo. Okay? So thank you again for listening. And now we are getting on to the next one, which is the third outer strategy. See you next time.